Hello, everyone. My name is Matej Kandrik, and I'm director of ADAB Institute, independent think tank from Slovakia. Our focus agenda is on security and defense policy. And today I happily represent another series of ADAB Euro-Atlantic series webinars, which are looking for intriguing and thought-provoking topics to discuss. Today, it's all ADAPT debate because my two guests are Martin Gvoth, the author of the paper, our junior analyst, and William Ostatník, our senior analyst, both from ADAB Institute. Guys, hello.
Well, thank you for letting me present my paper here.
Hi there.
We thank you. Oh, sorry, William.
No, it was just saying hi.
I guess the debate can be a little bit more informal than our usual webinars, as we are all good colleagues in here. Today, we are discussing really intriguing topic, and we will look into the future. We will look into the future when renewable energy will be the main source of energy around the world, and we will discuss how it changed the geopolitics on the global scale, and discuss if the renewable energy provide fewer or more incentives for states to use them as a geopolitical tool of influence. Martin, as out of the paper, please start with your presentation.
So firstly, I would like to start my intervention with thanking ADAB Institute for this opportunity, and for William and Matusz for good inputs, which made the paper better and better quality paper, I believe. So let me start with introducing my paper. So as we all know, we are currently experiencing global warming, and to mitigate the effects of the global warming and avoid the irreversible changes or triggering further tipping points associated with the rise of temperature, it is imperative that we limit the global warming to the maximum possible extent, hopefully 2 degrees Celsius, which looks now more like a realistic target. So, and to limit the global warming, it is necessary to transition from carbon-intensive energy sources, which we are currently using, to renewable energy and energy efficiency, along with deployment of renewable energy, which constitute the core elements of the energy transition I'll be talking about. And so this transition will be dominated predominantly by electricity generated from solar and wind power that will substitute the carbon-intensive fossil fuels, which currently account for approximately 60 to 70% of global greenhouse gases emissions. But besides the climate change, we are currently experiencing a war in Ukraine, which exposed the vulnerabilities of the EU in terms of energy security. So we know that the transition is inevitable in terms of climate change, but now also in terms of our eastern neighbor, Russia. So therefore, what my paper seeks to answer is whether we should fear the energy transition, or on the other hand, whether the transition could in turn decrease the use of energy as a geopolitical tool of influence. So from my point of view, and from what I'm arguing in the paper, I believe that owing to the characteristics of renewables, I believe that the transition to the green energy will provide less opportunities for energy to be used as a tool of geopolitical influence, and therefore could increase our, let's say, European energy security. So let me outline why. Firstly, let's look at the characteristics of renewables in terms of geographical or technical character vis-a-vis currently dominant energy source, the hydrocarbons or fossil fuels. So geopolitics of fossil fuels, which revolves predominantly around oil and gas, and they are finite and geographically concentrated resources, and the amounts in which fossil fuels are economically feasible to extract are located in only in few places around the globe, and therefore the extraction and processing are highly centralized. This leaves control over fossil fuels and effectively 80% of energy sources to few actors, giving them leverage they occasionally used to pursue their foreign policy interests. Let's say, for example, Yom Kippur War in 1967, or the recent conflict in Ukraine in 2014, and the war in Ukraine we are currently experiencing. So as fossil fuels do not incur energy losses during transport and are easy to store, they could be shipped globally. Therefore, also the transport routes such as Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of global oil flows daily, also present a tool of geopolitical dominance. But so such characteristics of fossil fuels have shaped the patterns of cooperation and conflict between the countries. So let's now move to renewables. In terms of renewables, although the energy from renewables is intermittent, which is a liability compared to the fossil fuels, they are on the other hand inexhaustible and ubiquitous, meaning that they are all over the world, or they can be found everywhere, as sun and wind flows everywhere or shines everywhere. As per the sun shines, wind flows, sorry. So furthermore, the transition over from long distance prove uneconomical as they incur a significant energy loss. The world where the renewables will be dominant will be much more decentralized, regionalized. This decentralization is further enabled by the fact that the renewables operate in much smaller production units, thus on a lower scale level than fossil fuels, which enables this regionalization. And so we will be shifting from global to more regional networks. Furthermore, due to this intermittency of renewables, there will likely be grid interconnectedness between countries, which will foster trade, and also interdependence, as we know from the liberal theory, also creates much more peaceful relations between countries. And so moving on to the final point, which I want to outline or present, is that yes, the technologies generating renewable technologies or technologies which generate renewable energy are dependent on rare earths and minerals, which are widely available on the planet Earth, and compared to fossil fuels, they are recyclable. Although the mining and processing of such materials is currently dominated by China due to its low cost production and also lax environmental standards. Thus, China has potentially promising position to leverage its mineral production as a tool of geopolitical dominance. For instance, these concerns began in 2010 when China imposed a rare earth embargo on Japan due to a territorial dispute, when Japan detained a captain of Chinese shipping boat. And considering the World Bank's estimate of 300% rise in materials required for the main energy generators, so photovoltaic panels or wind turbines, the monopoly over these materials could enable China to use them as a tool of geopolitical dominance. However, firstly, what I argue is that most rare earths are geologically abundant, so they are all over the Earth's crust. For instance, cerium, which is an important component into the batteries for the electric vehicles, is more common than lead. And although they are currently expensive to mine, there hasn't been much demand until recently. And with majority of rare earth elements imported from China, EU, as well as the US are investing considerable amount of money into research, mining, production, and recycling. And so I believe that one of my other main arguments on why critical minerals will not be geopolitical tool of dominance is the fact that energy transition is accompanied by technological breakthroughs and developments. Those are one of the factors on which EU relies as well in its critical minerals act. So, I think that with the technological developments, there will be coming technologies which use fewer raw materials, or we can recycle, as we are currently trying now. This was, for example, demonstrated by the reduction of material intensity of several rare earths following the 2010 case study between China, the Sino-Japan conflict, let's say in 2010, which not only made companies discover ways to alter their products to require fewer elements, but also led to also triggered the technological innovation. So considering how many solar panels and wind turbines we'll have to deploy, this will certainly accelerate the research and the money flowing into research on how we can use less critical minerals, how we can recycle them better. And also the market logic by itself, with the increased demand as projected by the World Bank, will certainly lead to opening of new mines. So China's dominance over the rare earths could still stand, but we'll be able to find our way around it, let's say. So just to sum up, I believe that the transition to renewable energy will provide fewer instances for states to use it as a geopolitical tool of influence. Owing to its characteristics, switch to renewables would lead to decentralization of production and thus to regionalization. Furthermore, the intermittency of renewables is likely to create interdependencies between countries, which should contribute, I believe, to peaceful relations among them. I know that this could be a contested topic, but we can discuss on this afterwards. And yes, I believe that this is all I wanted to say and what my paper basically outlines. Sorry for being too long and stuttering a bit.
Bilo, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Matej. I hope that you can hear me, because sometimes WebEx does this thing that until you stop speaking, you can't hear each other. But so thank you, Matej, for, of course, organizing this and Adapt covering this topic. It's a very important, very interesting topic. And of course, thanks goes to Martin. I'm happy that you are here. We are here discussing this. Once again, that I think that you are asking important questions, interesting questions. And it's important that we speak about this, because it has many connections, even direct connections to national energy security, of course, national security as well. And I think it's a complex issue. And therefore, I also hope that you will forgive me if I look from time to time to my notes, because I would not like to forget something that I wanted to mention, because it's a complex topic. So if you allow me, gentlemen, I'll begin with some of the strengths of the paper, of the brief that I particularly like. So overall, I really like how Martin differentiates or distinguishes between this short-term or short to mid-term and then long-term prospects. He also spoke about it already, but whereas in the short or mid-term short and mid-term prospects might look sort of grim, right? I mean, we're speaking about a lot of dependencies in terms of hydrocarbons or the renewables, and potential conflict, of course, over these, as we have been experiencing for basically a whole of history. But then Martin says that, or he thinks and proposes that in the long term, this actually might be reversed, and we might arrive at a situation where there are more peaceful relations, interdependencies, and more peaceful relations among the countries. I think that that's an interesting prospect and an interesting distinction between the short, midterm, and then the long term. Then there is also an interesting concept, these regional energy communities. I believe that I said that right. That Martin sees as the potential future, given the intermittent nature of the renewables. And he even goes further, I think, writing that an interdependence might lead to or solidify these peaceful relations. And as he said, I think that this can be contested, because history, unfortunately, proves this otherwise, that the economic interdependence does not necessarily lead to peaceful relations. I mean, Russia and the EU, or Russia-Ukraine conflict is one of the many examples that we have. But it's an interesting proposition and idea to think about. Then, of course, there is a decentralization of power and energy, which Martin mentions in his paper, and I think that that's another interesting point. It does have an potential impact on energy security and national security. Martin, I think you mentioned cybersecurity and cyber attacks, potential cyber attacks on such decentralized power grids. But I will use, and that might be one of the first questions or challenges to the author, I will use the concept of decentralization. And now, gentlemen, we speak about decentralized markets. I'm not speaking about grids anymore, but decentralized markets. Globally, if we speak about decentralized markets, extraction, which I think, Martin, you mentioned a lot of times, also in the paper, but also in the presentation, decentralization of markets in terms of extraction is fairly and relatively large. I mean, it's substantial, right? It's a diversified global market. We have relatively a lot of places where we can extract materials and critical minerals that we need. The problem might be with the processing, right? I mean, there is the refinement element to it. So we now stand, I believe you are aware of the situation, that in terms of refining capacities when it comes to critical materials that are necessary for the transition to renewables, we are completely dependent on China. Let's face it, right? So I would be interested in if Martin really sort of thought about this, or how he approached the issue of refining capacities. So not extraction, not dependency of rare earth elements in the earth crust, for instance, but about refining capacities. So once again, it could be long term again, but how do we from a long term perspective, how do we change this? How do we change the situation and not be dependent in these refining capacities on China as we are today? And that, of course, connects to other issues of supply chain bottlenecks, etc., etc. But that can be left for the discussion. So author's main question, if I can quote, is, will the switch to renewable energy provide fewer instances for states to use it as a tool of geopolitical influence? And as I said, of course, I will reiterate that this is very interesting and important question. And Martin, you say that from the long-term perspective, it will, right? That it will be used less as a geopolitical tool of influence or dominance. But I was also wondering if you were looking at states, particular states, where there is an abundance of whether rare earth elements or other elements, minerals, materials that are necessary, including the refining capacities. Are these states, do they have good governance? Do they have good governance structure? Are they stable societies? Are they democratic societies? Are they societies that can take care of their own security issues domestically? And I think I'm asking this because I think that it is also an important avenue to think about when we speak about the future and the long-term prospects of how energy security can impact us and how stable it can be and how peaceful it can be. If we look at these countries there, of course, right? I mean, there is Australia. It has a lot of lithium, for instance. Australia is a fairly goodly governed country, right? But then there are other countries, without naming them, which don't have a good record in terms of security, the domestic security and the domestic governance, etc. So that's something to think about, I think. I don't think that it comes as a surprise if I say that for me, the most important and intriguing part of the brief is the one that tries to tackle the issue of the critical raw materials. The author, Martin, argues that they, and I quote, will play a pivotal role in the era driven by renewable energy, and also that the legitimate concerns exist regarding whether these minerals may assume a comparable geopolitical significance to hydrocarbons. But I dare to say that you sort of, to me, it sounds like you sort of brush this off, this challenge with saying, and I quote, energy sector is witnessing remarkable technological advancements and innovations, primarily focused on the creation of more research-efficient and cost-effective technologies. So I agree with you completely that innovation and R&D is essential, right? But the problem is that I would be more skeptical, I would say, seeing innovation and R&D as the main, if not the only one, but the main potential remedy for future conflicts over the raw materials, right? I mean, to me, it sounds like, okay, so we will be using less of these materials, therefore, it won't be that of a problem that we are, for example, now dependent on China in this and this, right? So there will be more innovation. There is no reason to think that there will be less innovations. There will be more and more, and we will arrive at a destination where we use much less of this, and so therefore we are less dependent, etc. And I would be just more careful here because there are thousands of hurdles that history teaches us to innovation, right? I mean, thousands of things can happen that will hamper innovation. So making this the strongest point, if I'm not mistaken, Martin, then please correct me, but if this is the strongest point, and we will rely on innovation and that will help us overcome these potential dependencies, I would be more careful because that history proves us that we shouldn't count on innovation that much, but of course it's important. Now, just a couple of brief points to what I was missing in the paper. Sort of missing a tiny bit more complex analysis when it comes to the whole industrial process, which at the end of the day sees a product that captures the renewable energy, right? I mean, you're right, Martin, and once again, I quote, although intermittent, they are inexhaustible and ubiquitous. You said that yourself, meaning the renewable energy sources. And of course, I agree with you. The sun is shining, wind is blowing, and what else do we have? Of course, other things, renewables. But to capture this energy, we do need a lot of process, a lot of energy, usually from hydrocarbons, if we look at China, to produce things that will capture this energy, right? That will, whether we speak about solar panels, whether we speak about wind turbines, and these usually, if I'm not mistaken, are imported to the EU. So we don't make these, unfortunately. A lot of solar panels. China makes those and then sends it off to Europe. So I mean, this is something to think about. That in this sense renewables are not inexhaustible. I would dare to argue, and I would dare to sort of like remind everyone that we probably shouldn't, or I wouldn't think about renewables as inexhaustible and ubiquitous, because the source is, but the thing how we capture and store it and use the energy is. Also, I was missing a tiny bit a discussion on the important legislation and regulation. I was mentioning it earlier, but of course that's up for discussion. We can discuss that. I would like to mention it because I think it's important. Martin, you use a lot of great sources. Some of them, or maybe majority, I'm not sure, dates back before the Russian invasion to Ukraine, and then some of them also date back prior to COVID-related supply chain crises or crisis of 2020, 2021. So I think these developments since then and arriving at IRA, the legislation in the United States, the Biden administration passed it, and in the European Union, sort of a partner legislation to this, but that's the question, if it is a partner legislation, is the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. So a tiny bit of a discussion, at least a mention. I was sort of missing it there because I think that this is exactly what we have at hand, and we can look at how these legislations, how these regulations, at least at the EU, address these issues, the future of the energy, the future of the dependency on hydrocarbons, the future of the dependency on the CEE and other elements. So I think that would be that would even push the brief tiny bit forward. Right, I do have just. I'll be very short. I do have a couple of more remarks. For instance, about permits. Martin, you speak about abundancy, and you use that as an argument that we shouldn't be that worried. I'm rephrasing you. We shouldn't be that worried about the future, the long-term future. The abundancy can be one thing, of course, but getting it out of the earth, and you mentioned it yourself in the brief, is a whole another thing. And I don't mean just technical things, how to get environmentally friendly, how to extract these things from the Earth's crust, for instance. But it requires a lot of permits. It requires a lot of regulation and legislation that needs to happen in Sweden, I don't know, Spain, Italy, wherever in European Union, right? So I think that this can take a long time, so we need to keep that in mind. Right, what is there? I would also be sort of skeptical about this massive move towards electricity, because we know that there are some, or I would be interested in authors' view on how to make some of the critical products or critical materials for today's world, right? I mean, we have plastics, we have ammonia and other unorganic fertilizers that are crucial for agriculture, and other industrial products like steel or concrete or whatever, that can't be helped. If you put more electricity in the grid, these things will not be made. We currently need hydrocarbons. So if you think that more innovation will lead to new ways how to produce these critical products for today's industry and agriculture. That might be the answer. I just wanted to point it out. And two last side notes, and I promise, gentlemen, that I will be over for now, and I look forward to the discussion. Martin, you mentioned, and I can't resist saying this because I sort of try to address the issue of EU sanctions in my other works. So you mentioned, and if I'm not correct, please correct me in the discussion, Martin. But it's sort of, I had a feeling that you were saying that we are still, it's a case of a dependency still, EU on Russia. Even though we imposed 10 sanctions by now since last year, it is still a case where the EU is dependent on Russia. It's in hydrocarbons, it's in energy, right? So I would just, it's a side note, but I would just point out that these 10 sanction packages sort of did wonders. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm cheering this up to the stratosphere, but it really changed the game a lot. I mean, we are not dependent on hydrocarbons from Russia at all. I mean, if we compare it to the last year. So to sum up the points for discussion, I would be interested in how to make this a tiny bit more practical. Your brief, in a sense that if there are some concrete recommendations you would have for the EU, for instance, what to do. If it's mostly about innovation and R&D, so heavily investing into innovation and R&D is already something we need to do, or about some specific industrial or trade or investment strategy, or is it about investing heavily to, for instance, securing the power grids, right? That you mentioned that might be susceptible to cyber attacks in the future. I would think that this is the combination of all of these, that we need trade deals with countries, we need innovation strategy, we need investment strategy where EU, nation state, as well as private investors need to invest in third countries in both extraction as well as refining capacities. But I would just open that for a discussion if you want to say something about that, and I will leave it at that, at refining, which was one of the main points that I had. Refining capacities, what do you think about those, and how to get out of the dependency on China? So once again, thank you very much. I hope that these more or less critical remarks are taken as food for thought and a discussion. They in no way mean that I'm dismissing what Martin wrote. I think it's a very important and good contribution, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, William. I just have to add, nobody figured this out yet. So these are really debates to explore the thing, and getting things maybe not 100% right is just normal. And the things we need to struggle through to get to the right answers maybe later. Martin, over to you for your reactions and comments.
No, thank you for the comments. No offense taken at all, no worries. And so I'll just go point by point. I hope I marked everything. If not, please help me or adjust me. So first, concerning the refinement, was your question? Yes, refinement currently is a very ecologically heavy activity, for sure. Also capital heavy activity. But I believe, maybe it may be a simplistic view, but I believe, yes, through the technological revolution, let's say, we might be able to address this, make it more ecological, make it more feasible, and also make it more attractive to attract capital. And yeah, I believe these three factors would indeed help us with extracting and refining the raw materials. Of course, I can't say any give any practical recommendations, because it's as I said, it will be the end phase of transition, where I believe the market logic will drive the innovation, will make the refinement capital attractive, and also the capital efficient way of getting these critical minerals out. So also concerning the EU legislation, it is concerning the extraction of domestic, let's say EU EU critical minerals, which are in Sweden, I believe, Finland, let's say. Yeah, there's this problem of huge bureaucracy, which is always a problem with the EU. It's very slow. I think this has to be certainly accelerated. However, there's this problem of the inhabitants in those areas. I think we have to find some balance in between asking them, or like that's I think one of the biggest problems now, in between like asking them whether we can extract we can extract critical minerals in their vicinity. So I think this has to be certainly solved. EU has to accelerate their efforts on this. Also in terms of our international partnerships, I believe we should put more efforts in it. I know there are some agreements with Chile, for instance, Indonesia, which is one of the biggest supply of, I forgot which material, but it's critical for electric vehicles. I think they are starting to protect, or like being protective of their critical minerals, which makes, for example, for sure sense. But I think, of course, I might sound as a politician, but we should sit behind the table and cooperate on this, as it's a global issue, the global warming. And really, it is imperative that we accelerate the energy transition towards renewables. So I believe that this could be the solution. Obviously, it's a very hard solution. It's a very long shot solution, and quite honestly, it's more of a fantasy. But I believe, firstly, EU and US have to coordinate. They shouldn't propose legislation like the IRA or the Critical Minerals Act, which go against each other, not together. Luckily, there are some consultations now between EU and US, I believe. So this would be for the refinement. Then you touched on the effectiveness, I believe. Effectiveness, or like effective use, or recyclation. So, for instance, following the Sino-Japan conflict, let's say in 2012, it offered many incentives for Japanese companies which are technologically heavy, which is Japan is a technological empire, let's say. And so they invested into research and development. So it made their companies discover ways to alter their products to require fewer rare earths, but also trigger like technological innovation. For example, I think it was dysprosium, a rare earth element used in substantial quantities in powertrains for electric vehicles. So Hitachi and I think Molycorp together developed low dysprosium magnets, or like dysprosium free magnets. So they got rid of dependency, or like they try to mitigate their dependency on this material. So I believe this case study shows how, when there is more demand, when the climate change will be more and more, let's say, brutal, how all of it can lead to technological innovation, more capital being tunneled into these technologies, I would say. Yes. So second point you made, you were talking about. Can you please remind me? Was it? I think it was the contented point about like interdependency between countries, and how can this interdependency lead to more peaceful, let's say, relations? I would say renewables compared to oil and gas. Oil and gas flow in one direction, while the electricity trade is both way. And so when there are favorable conditions, country is an exporter. When not, the country would be an importer. And so on top of that, the renewables will help like to diversify energy sources. Therefore, all countries will have more access to more than one source, along with their own domestic production, and will not likely be dependent on one state. And furthermore, thanks to the interconnectedness between neighbors, countries could swiftly switch to another source in case there will be some villain country who would stop the distribution of electricity to gain some political advantage or something. So it would be unlike in Ukraine-Russia crisis in 2009, when the EU had limited options to substitute Russian gas. And also currently, yes, luckily EU got rid of the Russian gas. I think it's limited now to maybe 1/5 of what it was before. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe we should be still wary of this. There might be, like, hopefully not. There might be new actors which would like to coerce us withstanding energy from us. So yes, it's great that we diversified from Russia. We use different sources. We use Norway and stuff. We use gas from Norway, Qatar, but still we shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't be comfortable in this. We should really transition to renewables because of all the benefits I said before. And so just to come back to my point, I know I'm a bit all the way. So ultimately, when there would be like this political risk or of like imaginative particular energy supplier becoming high, it could, for example, lose its competitive edge over the domestic production. So it could incentivize countries to develop national renewable energy sources, which would be possible due to the abundance of renewable energy. That's how I would address this point. Obviously, it's a very hypothetical scenario. However, this is how I would see it, being an optimist, being a liberal, and trusting in interdependency theory. But obviously, everything can have drawbacks. We saw it in the history, in the past, as you said. And what would be the last point, please? I probably didn't note all of them, but yeah, this would be my response to most of your questions, I would say. I don't know if it's enough. Please let me know if you have any comments on it.
Oh, it's up to me. No, thank you. I mean, there is always more to discuss, but no, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's, I think, yeah, it's a complex issue. So, so I understand what are your positions. Just, yeah, okay. So couple of quick reactions to what you said. So I wouldn't see necessarily IRA and the EU Critical Raw Materials Act as a competition, in a sense that it definitely, IRA really surprised, of course, Europeans, and is necessary to, as you said, I would say, to negotiate for, if Europe wants to have access logically to the American market in terms of EVs, etc., then it needs to be negotiated to have access there, as countries that have free trade agreements with Washington do have. So, but I wouldn't say the EU Critical Raw Materials Act is directly a competition to the United States or IRA. I think it goes more in the direction of friendly countries, or reshoring, friendshoring, all these new trends, sort of. Right. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Indonesia. That's one of the countries that I see as a very, very important potential or potential partners. I think free trade agreements are, if we are, I don't want to sound too normative. I mean, if we are speaking analytically here, but if the EU wants to secure as much of an energy security as possible, I would argue that yes, one potential avenue is exactly to do free trade agreements, whether we speak about Indonesia, of course, Australia, Chile, Peru, even Vietnam. So these are very, very important countries. Of course, then there are other partners like Japan that you mentioned. And last but not least, oh yeah, right. There was maybe the like most critical point in the second intervention of yours. Right. I mean, you mentioned or you reacted to my point about the this liberal theory about economic interdependence leading to more peaceful relations. You mentioned how it can flow both ways, which renewables, which hydrocarbons cannot. I would still be very, very careful. It's my position. I would be very careful with this. I mean, theory is one thing, then practice is wholly another. So, I mean, countries usually, yeah, the history shows us that this is very, very sensitive topic when it comes to energy, when it comes to water, when it comes to all sorts of very critical materials and resources and sources. And I would still argue that there would need to be a factor inserted in the analysis of yours, and that for me would be the nature of the regimes of the countries that we are speaking about, that I mentioned in the first in my comments, that if we speak about some countries in Africa, I think it's necessary before we make a claim that okay, renewables will, more electricity from renewables, etc., will eventually lead to more, for instance, Pan-African integration. Before we make such a claim, it is because it can flow both ways. Before we make such a claim, it is necessary to look at how they are governed. What is the security, domestic security? Who is are there warlords? Are there people, PMCs? Are there private military corporations that are extracting the resources that we speak about, or is it the state? Is the state goodly governed? Is it a stable government, etc.? But this would be just a quick reaction. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. My view was more Eurocentric, so I was talking about democratic countries. But yeah, your point to make the analysis more global, more broad, more complex. Yeah, I think that should be a point addressed, and I'll think about it in the future. But yeah, in those cases, certainly.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. Yeah, you're more Eurocentric, and if we speak about situation within the European Union, for instance, then of course, yes, that is a wholly different situation.
If I may, I would like to take it from here, because this is something I was thinking quite a bit. What both of you would expect or imagine, what kind of behavior we can see from major exporters of oil, gas, and coal, fossil exporters, for which these exports are really important part of their state budget. How such countries most likely will react to the ongoing change to renewable energy, how it affects their position in international relations, and what we should expect as their reaction. Like, for example, countries like Nigeria, Russia, Iraq, Iran, and such countries, which I think we touch a little bit, which we can't really describe as democracies, or in some cases well-governed states. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So I know it's a broad category, but generally speaking, what kind of behavior would you expect from these countries to see in coming decades? How they cope with this change?
Martin, you wanna jump in, or do you want me to start? Whatever.
I would go after you if I may.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, I think that's of course. And can you hear me again, because WebEx? Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I think that we already have some experience with these. I mean, OPEC countries, for instance, they know the market logic. Come on, they have their own experience. They have their own brains to use. So if you decrease supply, the demand goes up and the price goes up, right? So I mean, this is exactly where I would go back to Martin's distinction between short and medium term to long term. So I mean, of course we can speak long term, what kind of world we would like to live in, but short, midterm, I would be once again perhaps more realistic or skeptical, if you will, whatever. But yeah, I think that these countries would react by cutting the demand, like rationally, right? Cutting the demand, which would short, midterm mean that the price for oil and gas and other hydrocarbons will actually jump. I think that it will. Me personally, I think that we didn't reach yet the peak of the hydrocarbon dependency or usage, right? Globally speaking. So that would be one point, that I think that they're going to try to use this leverage that they have, because the industry that I mentioned, whether we speak about the production of the fertilizers or steel or concrete, and I mentioned other products that are very, very essential for all of us, right? I mean, we all have our phones, we have our bottles where we drink water from. So I think this is all dependent on renewables. On hydrocarbons. So these countries will make use of that, and they will collectively, I think, make use of this reality for as long as possible. And second point, very briefly, also I think that it's important to mention that, and I'll be very, very harsh and strict. European Union is very good at setting regulation, a lot of it as much as possible, and we want to be number one in leading this battle against climate change. It's hard to say what other countries will do. I mean, of course, on paper, China is signing up for 2050 carbon neutrality. US is signing in its own way, of course. And what about let's call it global south, of course? What about these countries? I mean, how are they going to transition from very low growth countries to higher growth countries without actually having been exposed much to hydrocarbon energy, right? I mean, abundant energy and relatively cheap energy and relatively easy to transport, whatever all of it that Martin was mentioning. So I think that we need to keep in mind that the European Union, of course, that does all of these things and will try to do a lot of that. But then rest of the world, and that's the partial answer to your question, Matej, I think, is that the rest of the world might go all sorts of ways. And in 2050, we still can see a lot of countries using a lot of fuel. I mean, kerosene for the fuel for airplanes, right? And other, of course, fuel for cars, etc. So I think there will be market for it for a long time.
For sure, I agree. I even mentioned it in my essay that I think the countries who are the biggest exporters of oil will be very powerful, but in decline. So I believe we still haven't reached the age where the hydrocarbons will peak. So certainly it's a long way to go. I believe what could incentivize these countries would be the harsh effect of climate change that could help them get them on our side, help them stop fossil fuels, but we would have to assist them in a transition. Transition has to be complex. It has to encompass all kinds of actors, all countries, and looking at how climate change, let's say, works, it impacts the most. It impacts the countries which are most vulnerable, but from which we need to get materials. We need fossil fuels actually also to transition. So I think, yes, I agree with all the William's points. So yes, that would be my take on it. So I believe, yes, in short, in the transition period, all countries will be very powerful, but in decline, I would say.
Troubling me a lot, because combination of still powerful but in decline sounds like a potential for a lot of conflict. And we have to admit that this change is drastically changing the equilibrium of power within countries, between countries, and definitely also like on the above regional level around the globe. And such changes that come with disturbances and even conflicts. God forbid armed conflicts, but that's also the part of the history. Therefore, my line of thinking in here is going: if we are not going to see in the coming decade or decades that actually the change and our attempt to go green as European Union might trigger as a second or third rate consequence more conflict and more tensions in our neighborhoods. But I think that's speculation, right?
I mean, yes, certainly. I think I emphasized that the transition period might be violent, and it might be where the worst might happen. But speaking of the endpoint of transition, I believe, yes, it would be more peaceful. But yeah, considering, I mean, it is very important to consider the transition period, because it is that's the upcoming thing. That's what expects us. So I think, yeah, also and maybe in my future papers I will try to address it. And yeah, I would say definitely there might be conflict. Even there's high chance that there will be a conflict, or there will be like wars on resources, let's say.
Yeah, I don't think I have nothing. I have nothing to add to that. What Martin was just said. Yeah, it usually is like that, unfortunately, but that's reality. So we probably this is all speculation, as you said, Matej, but we will be seeing more conflicts until it can settle down. Right. So yeah, there will always be. It's important to think about this as yeah, first to understand reality as best as possible, and then if we depart from a perspective of wanting more energy security also in the future, and economic security and resilience in the European Union, for instance, then departing from this point, we can try to devise strategies. So I think that this discussion is a testament to these efforts, and we should continue the debate. Yeah.
Right. Just one more question, and I think you don't have to treat it very seriously, but looking at the very near-term possible consequences, let's go for something long-term. Would you say that there is a potential in space exploitation and mining asteroids as a way how to solve our crisis? Crisis, but the issue with the rare earth and rare materials and the way how we refine them, as we discussed during the debate. Would you see a future in the space?
I mean, I was the one who was talking most about research, development, innovation. So from my point, I should agree. But considering how refinement is even expensive now on Earth, I think we should focus on this. But certainly, it will be explored in the future. But as I'm not an astronaut, I can't even. I don't know what. Certainly, there are materials out there we can use, but I can't imagine the price it's going to cost to extract these. So I think we should channel all our resources to the materials found on Earth, and maybe as a plan B, we can go to space. And we also, I just wanted to point out that we forgot nuclear, which is important, which will be important in the transition phase, which could maybe could curb the influence of the oil countries, because nuclear, I believe, is the future, or at least is the future in the transition era. And I would certainly discourage from disempowering or like deconstructing nuclear power plants, because I believe for now it's the cleanest, the most reliable energy we have. So just adding on to that point. And yeah, so sorry, Elon Musk's space probably. I don't know. Maybe for Elon Musk, yes, but in general, I don't know if that's where we should channel our resources.
That is an excellent point, and I concur. Because resources are always scarce. I keep reminding everyone and everywhere about this harsh truth. So yeah, right. But 2 points: one to nuclear, one on nuclear, and one on the potential of mining the asteroids. I think that's very far-fetched, of course, as you yourself said, Matej. But I wouldn't neglect space in a sense that there are already strategies for not only mining, but generally space as an important domain, right? For instance, I can think of one characteristic of a lower Earth orbit, right? That is a space, I can't remember if it's 100 to 150 kilometers. Maybe I'm completely mistaken, but it's definitely called lower Earth orbit, where is the space where all the satellites are, for instance. So that will be a tremendously interesting and tremendously important area, like physical area, where I think that countries will start to make use of it, for instance, for more interplanetary voyages and potentially even extractions when the grandson of my grandson will be 50 years old, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe it will be much quicker, because let us not forget that the Lindbergh brothers were flying airplane or trying to fly airplane in the beginning of the 20th century, and they would still be around if they were old enough. They would still be around to see Concorde flying. So come on, right? I mean, the innovation can happen very quickly. And Martin, you said it yourself. And to end this, I think that there is no better point than nuclear. I consider myself also to be an analyst that sort of is honest about this, that if we are once again trying to transit as best as possible, if we are trying to have some industrial strategy at hand, that Europe will not become in Slovak it's skanzen, right? So what's the English equivalent to that, right? I mean, like a place that, like a museum, right, that people go to and they see nice things, they eat nice food, but that's just industrially it's a Detroit, right? So if we are not going to go in this direction, we definitely want to use and need to use nuclear. So I agree with Martin 100% that we shouldn't neglect this factor when we speak about transition and eventually going to renewables. Nuclear is a very important area to even for research and development.
Yeah, well, about the power of innovations, we have Wright brothers, first powered airplane in '93. And then we have landing on the moon and the first human step on the surface of the moon in 1968. So maybe we shouldn't think small and rather think big, but still stay with our foot on the ground and looking on the issues and challenges in front of us. Gentlemen, thank you very much for today's discussion. I enjoyed it very much. I found it really enriching and thought-provoking.
Thank you very much.
Same here, and thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Goodbye now.